The ages of man, like waves washing over sand, touch ever so briefly the hard and crusty surface of the earth. Yet at every place the impression left, however soft, lives within each generation's eternity. There is a quote from Marcus Aurelius that says, "Every instant of time is a pinprick of eternity." This small piece of land, only approximately 60 acres, that is the site of today's Indian Riverside Park, is unique in that it opens windows through which we can see each of the pinpricks that make up this land's eternity. Just on the other side of the rise behind me is a prehistoric midden that has yielded fragments of a civilization existing 4,000 years ago. The mansion that you can just about see through the trees represents another pinprick. It is built on land that at the end of the 19th century was the first recorded property ever to be bought here in Martin County. Nearby is a building that represents the education era of the land's long history. Now boarded for protection from further deterioration, it was once a beautiful chapel, its stained glass windows filtered the sparkling sunlight reflecting off the waters of the Indian River Lagoon. Built in the 1950s by the Sister of St. Joseph, the chapel was the hub of first the Sisters Novitiate, then a private girls' school, and finally St. Joseph's College. When the Sisters of St. Joseph sold the property to Florida Institute of Technology in the 1970s, the chapel was expanded into a chapel auditorium. The students of FIT brought the building alive with music, plays, and lectures that excited both mind and soul. After thousands of years, this land is now in public hands. It belongs to all of us who live in Martin County. Now, the Francis Langford Center hosts the parties of 21st century Martin Countians. The picnic pavilions are filled with today's Martin County families enjoying each other as they cool off in the perpetual breeze that drifts over the river. The new interactive fountain is alive with the shouts and laughter of Martin County's children. Even we, who now inhabit this land that we call Indian Riverside Park, are only pinpricks. For there is more to come. As it always has, this land will soon open windows to the future. Join us as we explore Indian Riverside Park. Be part of our search for those soft impressions left by those who came before, and imagine the possibilities that lie in store for those yet to be born, whose lives will touch this remarkable piece of land. In that time before written history, what is now Martin County was populated by prehistoric people known as the Ayes. The Ayes, hunter-gatherers, inhabited much of the area surrounding the Indian River Lagoon. Mount Elizabeth, the Ayes' midden that makes up much of Indian Riverside Park, was most probably built for ceremonial purposes. Surrounding it were villages founded by peoples that may well predate those who built Great Pyramids of Egypt. Researchers believe the Ayes, not unlike their 21st century descendants, came to this piece of land beside the Indian River to escape the overcrowding further north. The area provided year-round resources as well as an easy canoe access to the river and ocean. The Ayes built their huts from palm fronds, using the long, slender branches to cover the hut sides as well as form the roofs. Their lives were structured by a hierarchical framework, and their culture was built on a religious foundation.
They had a cacique or chief and some sub-chiefs, and they also had a shaman, and they had a type of religion.
It has been estimated that there were about 20,000 natives in southern Florida when the Spanish arrived in the 1500s. European contact, however, spelled the beginning of the end for the Ayes people. In less than 200 years, by the late 1700s, their population had declined to roughly 300 souls.
We aren't sure how long the Indians lived here, but we know that in 1704, northern Indians, under the leadership of the English, who were traditional enemies with the Spanish, invaded Spanish Florida and came down as far as Lake Okeechobee, and they took these Indians, who they left alive, some of them, back to the slave market in Charleston, sold them as slaves. They also burned the villages and things like this. European alliances came into this country that way and did damage to it.
The Age of Discovery brought the Europeans, first the Spanish, then the French, and finally the British, to Florida, beginning in the early 1500s. The Spanish came because they wanted to establish settlements that would protect their sea routes back to Spain, over which they carried the treasure plundered from forays into Mexico and what would become known as Central America. They came because they were entrepreneurs, and they saw themselves as the land developers, the industrialists, and the agribusinessmen of the time. And when they came, they believed the Spanish culture was higher and their religion superior to that of the natives. For those reasons, they felt compelled to civilize those that they saw as savages. That is why they came to the hostile land they called Florida. And in some ways, they achieved what they set out to do. But for the most part, they failed. They made no discoveries of precious metals or gems that would bring riches in Spain. The coastal soil was not rich enough to support sustainable agriculture. There were mutinies by troops and colonists worn and weary from the struggle to survive. And they never even bothered to find a way to coexist with the Native Americans who already inhabited the coveted land. Settlement of the strange, lush, tropical peninsula was slow, and it was brutal. The first depiction of the Florida Peninsula appeared on a Spanish map in 1502. Then, in 1513, the first European walked through the surf and left footprints in the Florida sand. Juan Ponce de Leon made landfall in the vicinity of what is present-day Melbourne. It was early April, during the Feast of Easter. Ponce named the land he claimed for Spain Pascua Floridia, the Spanish phrase for Easter. In 1564, a small group of French Huguenots settled on the St. Johns River near present-day Jacksonville. Like the Spanish, they hoped Florida would yield economic opportunity, but they also hoped to establish a place where religious tolerance would flourish. They named the colony La Caroline after Charles IX of France. When Spain's King Philip II learned that French explorer Jean Ribault was about to reinforce La Caroline with provisions and troops, he sent Admiral Pedro Menendez de Avalles to remove the French colony and retake the land that had been claimed by Ponce de Leon for Spain. Ribault, in an effort to protect the colony and the New World land, sent his forces against St. Augustine and Menendez. A hurricane played havoc with the French ships, leaving scattered wrecks all along the beaches of today's St. Johns and Flagler counties. Menendez, knowing La Caroline was undefended, attacked the colony, killing 140 defenders and capturing 60 women and children. Spanish troops then marched down the beach, taking captive the French survivors of the hurricane. The Spanish took the 350 shipwrecked French to a site just south of St. Augustine, where they hacked the French to death with their swords. The focus of this formative period of settlement was northern Florida. South Florida remained the domain of natives who had inhabited the land for a millennia. But 4 years before the 17th century, one of the first Europeans to discover South Florida did so inadvertently and under duress. Jonathan Dickinson was a young, well-to-do Jamaican merchant. On August 23, 1696, he set sail from Port Royal in the three-masted brigantine, the Reformation. The ship and its complement of 25 was separated from the 12-ship convoy, making the voyage to Philadelphia when the normally strong ocean breeze died away to nothing. Alone and becalmed, the Reformation and her passengers could do nothing but wait for the wind. When it came, it blew in as a violent storm, perhaps even a hurricane. The storm pushed the foundering ship closer and closer to shore, and at 1 a.m. on September 23rd, the Reformation ran aground near Hobe Sound. Huddled on the beach that is today Jupiter Island, the small band was found by local natives and taken captive. The natives' attitude toward Dickinson and the other Europeans in the party alternated between hostility and friendliness. Several times while they were captive, their lives were threatened, and the group lived in constant mistrust bordering on fear, never sure if they would remain alive or be killed. Eventually, the natives released the travelers, but their freedom only led to more hardship. They faced a weeks-long trip by foot through the thick Florida wilderness to the safety of the tiny settlement of St. Augustine, 230 miles to the north. In 1763, the British wrested Florida from Spain and governed the peninsula for the next 20 years. At the close of the American Revolution, Spain regained Florida from the British, but the land's original discoverers now face pressure from the young nation to the north as it looked toward expansion. To encourage immigration, Spain offered 100-acre land grants in Florida. The land deals attracted the new U.S. citizens. In fact, it was this Spanish policy that brought the first settlers to Martin County. It was during this period that the Hanson family received a grant from the Spanish Crown that included much of what is now Port Salerno. But it would be two wars, the War of 1812 and the First Seminole War, that gave the United States its first excuse to gain a foothold in Florida. In 1821, under a treaty hammered out by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams and Spanish Minister Don Luis de Onis, the United States took Florida from Spain by assuming $5 million of Spanish debts and surrendering any claims to Texas. The population center of territorial Florida was still centered in the western and northeastern areas of the peninsula. South Florida remained an untamed frontier. In the 1840 census, the first to include Florida, the two counties that made up South Florida, Mosquito and Dade, had a total population of 519. Dade County reported 446 people. And Mosquito County, what is now Brevard, St. Lucie, Martin, and Palm Beach counties, reported a population of 73. Just 5 years after that 1840 census, on March 3, 1845, Florida became a state, and the peninsula's 57,921 residents became United States citizens. Finally, for the first time since the Eyes Indians lived along the banks of the Indian River, the area began to repopulate. Slowly, pioneers began settling areas along the Indian River. The population for Dade and Mosquito counties increased from the 519 souls counted in the 1840 census to 625 in 1850. 5 years after that 1850 census, naturalist and explorer William Henry Racy made the first ever purchase of property in Martin County. He called the land he bought Mount Elizabeth.
William Racy was an early purchaser of land by South Florida standards. In 1855, was just shortly after the United States, the state was formed in 1845, so 10 years. And all of the land, or much of the land that was not Spanish land grant land, was available for purchase to anyone who would come and homestead it, or someone who would pay a small amount for it.
William Racy never lived on Mount Elizabeth. It was his son, Charles, who cut back the wilderness, built a home on the land, and became one of the early settlers of Martin County. When Charles Racy began to develop Mount Elizabeth on the bluff of the Indian River, Benjamin Harrison was beginning his term as U.S. President. Idaho and Wyoming were admitted as the 43rd and 44th states, respectively. The U.S. Weather Bureau was created, and Sitting Bull was killed in a skirmish with U.S. soldiers in South Dakota. The children's book, Black Beauty, by English author Anna Sewell, was published in the United States by the American Humane Society, and the first Army-Navy football game was played at West Point. Navy won 24-0. The gay 90s was a time of optimism and expansion. Although much of that optimism was limited to the wealthy, at the time it was estimated that a tiny 1% of the people in the United States possessed more wealth than the rest of the population combined. That 1% believed that nothing was impossible and that life was constant progress. The builder of Mount Elizabeth was a product of that time.
Charles Racy was a gentleman farmer and really probably led a life more like retirees today. Even though he was only 30 when he retired from being an optician, he came down and he was independently wealthy and did not need to work for a living, but he certainly kept very busy. And pineapples were being grown all around him, and he was buying land and he was improving the area so his life would be enhanced by educated neighbors and interesting settlers. So he helped the other settlers even though he wasn't in need of funds. So he built this lovely house, and when I realize now that he was 30 years old and had these 3 children, I'm amazed that he was able to accomplish and do all he did at that time when even lumber was almost impossible to get. But we have pictures of his home. It was a lovely 2.5-story home. You know, I consider it 3 stories, but 2.5 stories. And it stood on top of the Indian mound that was named Mount Elizabeth. And this is typical because pioneers would come and they would choose the same land that the Indians had chosen and had built up with the debris of their shellfish dinners, because that was an elevation, and elevations were hard to come by in South Florida, especially ones near the water. So this home was a grand gathering place for pioneers. I know of 2 weddings that took place. The Wills were married there, and the Sorensens were married right there in the home on Mount Elizabeth. He was very active in the community. There were no roads, so he was on a group to build good roads and was responsible for the first road between what is now Mount Elizabeth, or at that time that was Waveland, and Fort Pierce. So another thing that he did, he founded one of the first yacht clubs in South Florida, right there where Indian Riverside Park is today. Later it had a facility out on Hutchinson Island near the House of Refuge. It was called Gilbert's Bar Yacht Club, and it was the social scene of the day. That was what people did for recreation, have boat races and gather and have picnics.
The Racy family lived at Mount Elizabeth for almost 30 years. But like other families, change eventually pulled Charles away from his pioneer home.
The daughter, Edith, married the next door neighbor just a little to the north. The Schuyler's lived there, and she married Carl Schuyler and moved to Miami. And I think that's why Charles and Mary Racy ended up moving to Miami themselves, because their daughter and her son were there, and her husband. And so while they were there in 1920, their 2 sons, who also were college educated and had come back home and were running the grove that was there on Mount Elizabeth and selling fruit and pineapples. And we have the logo of their business operation. They were there when the house caught fire and it burned to the ground. And it was, of course, quite a spectacle. All the people that lived on the St. Lucie River and the Indian River could see it for miles around. And it was a sad spectacle because it was the end of the pioneer era and the Raceys living in this place.
Like many who came after him, Charles Racey understood the potential of his adopted home. He spent the prime of his life nurturing the small community along the Indian and St. Lucie rivers. Yet he never had the opportunity to see the full realization of the potential he had worked toward. The fire ended the Racey era on the land we now call Indian Riverside Park, just 5 years before that land became Martin County. The land that would become Martin County had been governed by 3 nations, Spain, Britain, and the United States. And since 1821, the land had been part of 5 Florida counties: St. John's from 1821 through 1824, Mosquito Orange from 1824 through 1844, Brevard St. Lucie from 1844 through 1866, Dade from 1866 through 1909, and Palm Beach County from 1909 to 1925. By 1925, the people who lived on the land believed they were underrepresented and overtaxed as part of Palm Beach County. Both pioneers and newcomers, drawn to the Florida land boom of the early 1920s, desperately wanted their destiny in their own hands. The residents of the area formed a county division committee to work toward countyhood during the 1925 legislative session. The process moved slowly until the delegation decided to name the new county after Governor John Wellborn Martin. Flattered, the governor helped smooth the way with legislators. The Florida Senate approved the bill creating Martin County on May 28, 1925. The governor signed it 2 days later on May 30th. And newly minted Martin County commissioners held their first meeting on August 5, 1925. 4 months later, in January 1926, the new Martin Countians celebrated the birth of their county. Governor Martin and his wife joined thousands of people who came from throughout Florida for a parade that included floats, costumed school children, bands, and over 700 decorated automobiles. The marvel of Martin County's future was short-lived, for no sooner had the county been formed that the bottom fell out of the land boom. The depression that hit South Florida in 1926 was the harbinger of what would happen to the rest of the nation in 1929. The growth that Martin County founders hoped for never happened. By 1930, the population of the fledgling county was just 5,100 people. The Racey property, abandoned after the fire in 1920, remained empty until the early 1930s, when it was finally sold to Judge Edward Swan. Judge Swan held the land until 1936. It was then that Williford and Ann Bates Leach, a Georgian couple who wintered in the area, first saw the land. For Ann Leach, her first visit to charred remains of Mount Elizabeth convinced her it was where she wanted to live.
Mr. and Mrs. Leach came to this area from Atlanta, Georgia. They had been seasonal visitors, but at one point in time they decided that they might like to come and survey the area for a potential home site. They had friends who were also winter visitors, and 2 of them, Robert Cheek, who was of the Maxwell House coffee fortune, and L.F. Knowles, both suggested to them that they come to the Sewell's Point area. So they did come and take a look-see, and they were very impressed with the area, and Mrs. Leach particularly was happy about the Indian Mound when she came up on top, looked out over the river and said this would be a dandy place to put a mansion.
Like the Raceys before them, the Leaches were on a firm financial footing when they arrived in Martin County.
When she was a child, her mother was widowed when she was 10. And at the time they were impoverished, and they went to live with her mother's sister, who had married the founder of Coca-Cola. And they were just getting cranked up, and he told my mother, now this was my aunt's husband, to beg, borrow, or steal whatever they could find and buy Coca-Cola stock, because that was going to be the wave of the future. And I can remember my mother saying that that was the only thing all during the Depression that paid a dividend.
Young Anne and William were no more than toddlers when their mother and father brought them to what had been Mount Elizabeth and would become Tuckahoe.
They moved down here from Atlanta. My father heard about a Ford dealership in Stewart, and he had worked for Packard in Atlanta, so he thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to start. So they bought, this was mainly a property of orange groves, and there was a packing house where they packed the fruit, which is where we sort of camped until the little house was built. And then we lived in the little house while the big house was built. Someone told my mother that that was the highest point on the east coast of Florida. It was probably 50 feet above sea level, and that was Mount Elizabeth.
While Wilfred worked to sell Fords, Anne worked to improve the tiny community that she had made her home.
The focal point of this mansion was to do entertaining. Anne describes her mother as being a social animal. She loved to entertain and have people coming and going in the house. And she had the means to accommodate this type of lifestyle. She was a Coca-Cola heiress. And she had a nanny, she had a laundress, she had a cook, she had people who kept house, she had someone to maintain the exterior of the premises. So she could set about doing just about what she jolly well pleased. She did set up a garden club. She did that immediately upon arriving here, and her good friend Josephine Taylor enabled her to locate the proper people, and so they brought lots of ladies who wore hats and gloves onto the mansion.
Looking at life at Tuckahoe from the perspective of almost 70 years, it seems almost idyllic, but it too had its downsides.
That was a wonderful swimming pool, but that was before the days of filtering. And so it had to be totally dumped, scrubbed every inch of the walls with a wire brush and Clorox and whatever else, muriatic acid I think was some of the stuff. And they had a artesian well that filled up the pool without any need for a pump. All you did was just turn the valves. It was down there below the pool, and it could fill the pool, I think 250,000 gallons or something, overnight. Then it would be black because it was sulfur water for one day, and then it would sort of turn light green, and then it was clear maybe 2 days before it started getting dirty again. So it had to be totally dumped. They had some kind of, what they thought it was pretty revolutionary, pipes to dump the water from the pool to sprinkle the grass. So as it was emptying every week, the water wasn't just wasted or dumped in the Indian River.
Like the rest of the nation, December 7th, 1941, thrust Martin County abruptly into World War II. At Tuckahoe, everything changed.
My father went to volunteer. He was going to be in the, he was a World War I flyer in the RAF. And he had decided that World War II was here. He was an able-bodied man. He was going to volunteer, and he was quite crushed. That was a bad day when he went to the draft board and they said he was too old. And he said he was much stronger and much healthier than the guy that told him he was too old to be in the service. But anyway, all you could do back then was to volunteer your boat for the Coast Guard. And so he went out and had his boat all painted gray, and every night he would patrol up and down the Indian River to be sure no spies came in from the submarines offshore. And they had torpedoed tankers during the war, and actually a lot of them ended up in Martin County Hospital, the survivors that managed to escape the tankers after they were torpedoes. So there was quite a concern.
Life settled back to normal at war's end. But one more adventure was in store for the Leach family during their time on the land beside the Indian River.
We were in the house. The hurricane of '49 was really the last straw, I think, as far as my mother was concerned. However, when it became known that a hurricane was coming, my mother was out of there just about as fast as anybody could get out of there. So my father and I were the only ones left to hold the fort. And at that time, there was no warning system that told you how strong a hurricane was or how dangerous it was. We had not one storm shutter. We knew nothing about hurricanes. And when the storm came, I can remember the last advisory before the radio went out. It says, take all precautions, it is dangerous, I think was the worst thing they said about it.
Martin County began to grow, and although the 1949 hurricane may have been the final straw that sent the Leach family from Tuckahoe, the way in which the county was growing played a major role in the Leach's decision to leave the area.
William and Ann had gone off to Gainesville in 1950 when they got a notice that their mother had decided she was going to move. Well, the reason the move came about was because when the Leaches saw that tourist cabins were going to be developing all around them, both north and south, and that the marina south of them was being dredged, they became insistent that the county decrease their tax assessment. They felt that was only the proper thing to do. So Mr. Leach put it on the market for $150,000 and got no takers. He advertised, and finally they decided through a friend of theirs down in Palm Beach that they would sell it to a novitiate, because that way it would be tax-exempt status and the county was going to lose that tax money.
For almost 100 years, the land we now call Indian Riverside Park had been in individual ownership. With the sale of the property by the Leach family, that would change, and the land would never again belong to just one person. 1952. General Dwight Eisenhower, who had served as Supreme Allied Commander in World War II, is elected President of the United States. After 2 years of conflict, a tentative truce is in place in Korea, and an armistice will soon be signed, stopping the fighting. Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communism crusade is at its peak, and Herman Wouk's novel, Decay Mutiny, receives the Pulitzer Prize. In Martin County, U.S. Highway 1 and A1A were being widened. The Grumman Corporation had been leasing Witham Field for 2 years, and county commissioners were discussing extending that lease for another 10 years. The house on the hill that Ann Bates Leach had filled with flowers and had seen young Ann and William Leach grow into adults now had new tenants, a small group of nuns, the Sisters of St. Joseph.
The Sisters of St. Joseph of St. Augustine purchased this property in 1952. Some renovations and additions had to be made to the Leach estate as we knew it, adding dormitory space. Our novices at that time were in Lantana, Florida. So when we moved up here, I would say there were probably about 30 novices in the novitiate. There were 2 dorms. And I came in 1957. And so when I entered the community, I entered the novitiate in that white house on the hill.
Like the Raceys and the Leaches before them, the Sisters of St. Joseph brought something new to the area, but they grew with the surrounding community and, in the same spirit of the pioneers who had come before, struggled and eventually prospered on the land.
It was very, very small town. I think we were a real anomaly for the population. They weren't quite sure what these sisters in their black and white robes were. So we found, a lot of opportunity, I guess, to educate a little more about what sisters are, what Catholics are. It's amazing to me now to see how many Catholic churches are in this area. I remember the very small church on Ocean Avenue, St. Joseph's. I taught catechism there as a novice.
For 20 years, the Sisters of St. Joseph remained on the land beside the river. Under their stewardship, 2 dormitories, a dining hall, library, administrative classroom complex, and chapel were built. But finally, the small college may have become a victim of its time. 1972 was a year of seething turmoil that would soon boil over into scandal. The turmoil of the time spilled over into Martin County. For that year, the county found itself embroiled in controversy and scandal. A citizens group had been appointed to look into the possibility of developing a charter form of government for the county. County commissioners and county staff were involved in the process of developing something that was called a Growth Management Comprehensive Plan. The administration of St. Joseph's College, like college administrators across the nation, found itself dealing with a student body that was restless. 25 students were arrested and charged with drug-related felonies and misdemeanors. Eventually, charges against all except 3 students were dropped, and only 1 student ultimately stood trial and was convicted. In January of 1972, St. Joseph's Board of Trustees announced that the college would close in May. In June, the college held its last commencement, and the Sisters of St. Joseph's left the house on the hill for the very last time. The property that had once been part of a primitive Native American village now supported 14 buildings that could house and educate hundreds of young 20th century Americans. But once again, the land had been left vacant. It would not remain empty for long. 2 months after the Sisters of St. Joseph's held their final commencement, Florida Institute of Technology, a small science and engineering school based in Melbourne, announced that it was ready to buy the St. Joseph's campus and turn it into a marine and environmental technology center. Martin County welcomed the new school with open arms. Its 380 students would give a boost to the Martin County economy. The school did become a direct link to local young people interested in marine ecology study. Mark Perry, the current executive director of Florida Oceanographic Society, had lived in Martin County almost all his life, and he became one of FIT's first students.
I was here in 1972 when they first opened the campus, and it was called then Hydrospace Tech, a part of FIT. Dean Teeley was the first dean, and we may have had about, maybe 100 students at the most, and it was a great group, a lot of foreign students, and I remember we got together a good soccer team. We used to play a lot of good soccer and play other schools and stuff, so that was a lot of fun. And it was just a brand new campus, kind of taking over the dorms and the classrooms and everything fitting in, and the Raskeller and everything at the student center and things like that. So it was a great group of people, and for that time it was good for me doing a 2-year associate degree from 72 to 74. And then I went away in the merchant marine and research areas with the University of Miami, and came back too, and came here again in 84 to 86, so that time.
Even though FIT was a wonderful addition to the choices for Martin County students, the school attracted students from all over Florida. Morris Crady, now a land planner here in Martin County, was one of those young people who came to FIT from another part of the state.
Well, I came to FIT in Jensen Beach back in 1978, and I graduated from high school at Bishop Kenny in Jacksonville, Florida, and I wanted to go to a college that was close to the water, and I like to fish, and so I picked out FIT because it was on the Indian River, and came down here to study the environment. I'm actually majored in aquaculture.
One of the things that attracted FIT officials when they purchased the campus was to the potential to offer FIT students an all-around college experience. Morris Crady, like so many FIT students, found the all-around college experience the catalyst for his own personal growth.
And I got here early because I was on the soccer team. Played soccer the first year I was here, and it was interesting because the school attracted players from all over the world. A lot of people from South America, Brazil, Honduras, Mexico, and a lot of those people came here because of the fish farming, the aquaculture trade, because there was a lot of that going on in South America, but they were also good soccer players. And I met people from Ireland, Scotland, and it was a real culture shock for me because I was just from Jacksonville, Florida, on the redneck side of Jacksonville, Florida, which is the north side, and that was the big shake. First of all, was just getting to know all these people from all over the world. Many of them couldn't speak good English, but we played soccer together. And the first 2 weeks we were here, we stayed in the dorms. In the whole first year, I stayed in the dorms, which is now the Plaza, of course, the assisted living facility. Hopefully, I'll die there and come full circle. But anyway, we came here, and what was interesting is there's a lot of Nigerians here too. And I was the only one that brought any fishing poles. And the cafeteria early on was closed. And there wasn't a lot of food. We didn't have a lot of money. And so I was the only one that could catch fish out of the Indian River. And at the time, all I could catch was pinfish, which is really just the bait fish, I later learned. But anyway, we scaled them and gutted them. And the Nigerians showed me how to make fish stew. And they just put the whole fish in there and boil it up with some biscuit and put in a little spice. And we survived off of that fish stew for the first 2 or 3 weeks before the cafeteria opened. In fact, that whole first year, I survived off of fish stew, some little cans of beef stew that my mama sent me by the caseload, and whatever bread we could steal out of the cafeteria.
If the FIT experience helped Morris to grow up, it gave the serious Mark Perry an opportunity to have some fun.
Yeah, the Rathskeller was quite the place. It was not only a place for the students on campus and everything to gather, but also off campus. A lot of young people from around the community used to come. And of course we had music and bands and loud stuff, and a lot of gatherings would happen there. And of course the beer on tap was just incredible. And we'd play games till way hours in the wee morning and forget about studying and things like that. And then we'd have these outside concerts too, out in the kind of amphitheater area, which was really kind of incredible. It was just a great kind of gathering spot. And it was kind of down in that dungeon area, down below the house, which was kind of like, you felt like you were in the basement and kind of out of the way. So it was really interesting back then.
Like most other college students, Morris and Mark remember the good times. And like other colleges, academics were most important at FIT. But because of where FIT was located, the academic life took on a laid-back quality. Kathy LaMartina, now an executive with South Florida Water Management District, appreciated the lifestyle on the FIT campus and the dedication of its faculty and staff.
One of the things I remember most about FIT here was the relaxed and casual atmosphere of the campus. Most people walked around in their bathing suits, slaps. Lots of people were barefoot in class. I personally brought my dog to just about all of my classes. She either sat next to me or she really liked one instructor quite a bit. And she'd go up and sit with him every time I went into that class, the only one that she would do that with. And he had a habit of pacing back and forth in front of the class, and he would just step over her, continue his talk, and then step back over her, etc. So that was real nice to have that relaxed atmosphere.
Marion Rice had a vision when she took the reins as chancellor at the Jensen Beach campus of FIT in 1984. She came to the school when the enrollment was decreasing and long-standing fiscal problems had left the school with a hefty deficit. To turn the school around, Ms. Rice sought to broaden the school's appeal to students by expanding the curriculum. But only 19 months into her term as chancellor, the Melbourne-based senior administrative staff decided decreasing enrollment and an $800,000 budget deficit could not be overcome. In January of 1986, the school's board of trustees voted to close the Jensen Beach campus and sell the property.
And that was tough. I remember what made it tougher, walking across the campus to that assembly building in great apprehension to have to tell the students who loved it here, and some of them were freshmen, some of them were sophomores, some juniors, some seniors, to tell them that the campus was going to be no more in 7 months. Walking across the campus, suddenly I looked up in the sky, and there was Challenger blowing up. And that was Black Tuesday, the same day. So it was a Black Tuesday.
Once again, the land was empty. But something was different now. In the past, the people that had been nurtured on the land left it to live their lives in other places. This time, Many of the FIT students found something on the land that held them to it. Many stayed, and others, after spending a portion of their lives elsewhere, found themselves drawn back to this land and the community surrounding it. It would take over 10 years, but for the first time in its history, this land that had nurtured Native Americans, pioneer families, and 2 educational institutions would eventually be owned by the citizens of Martin County. How that came about is a story of dedication and tenacity. And like all of the other stories that came before it, it begins with people who understood the land's potential. But like the struggle of Martin County pioneers to tame the land, the realization of the property's modern potential under public stewardship would be an epic battle. By August 1987, the FIT campus had been closed for a year. FIT announced it would sell its abandoned Jensen Beach campus to a Connecticut businessman, James Metz, who had recently purchased the Francis Langford's Outrigger Resort. In March 1987, well before the announcement of the sale to Metz, the Citizens Committee to Save FIT began gathering support for public purchase of the land. For over a year, the citizens lobbied Martin County to purchase the property through a bond referendum. By early summer, public purchase of the property had become a hugely controversial issue, and in June, a Palm Beach Post survey indicated that public opinion was running 2-1 against the bond issue. Yet, as a result of a well-organized campaign by the citizens group, when the issue came to a vote in November, 58% of Martin County voters approved a $12 million bond issue. Since Metz had owned the property for over a year, he slowly began to move forward by bringing development plans for the property to county staff. At almost the same time, the county began negotiations with Metz to purchase the property. What on the surface seemed to be a simple real estate deal proved to be more convoluted than anyone could ever imagine. The saga begins in October 1988 when Metz misses a payment on his contract with FIT. The next month, of course, Martin County citizens approved $12 million for purchasing the property. Only a month later, in December, FIT begins foreclosure proceedings on Metz because of the missed payment. In February 1989, 2 things happen. First, the county offers Metz $7.8 million for the property, and second, Metz's development plan for what he calls Lord Dunmore's. The development includes housing units, shops, and a riverwalk. With his development project in the county's pipeline, Metz was less anxious to sell the property, and in March he rejected the county's purchase offer, saying that he now wanted $10 million for the property. In August, the County Commission gave final approval to Metz development, and it seemed that the attempt at public ownership of the land was a dead issue. Although Metz had approved for his development, for almost a year he allowed the property to remain dormant. Then in May 1990, the bombshell that changed everything exploded. The foreclosure suit that FIT had brought against Metz in 1988 was decided in FIT's favor. Metz was given 1 month to bring his payments on the property up to date. Only 1 hour before the foreclosure deadline in June, Metz filed for bankruptcy. The move set up a scenario in which FIT was once more given title to the property. The hopes of citizens who supported public ownership were raised in January 1991 when FIT offered the property to Martin County with a price tag of $7.2 million. But those hopes were quickly dashed when the County Commission voted 3-2 not to buy the land. By 1992, FIT had the property on the open market. Yet almost as if destiny was controlling fate, there was no significant activity during the 2-year period between 1992 and 1994. This land, so beautiful and potentially bountiful, has always required tenacity from its inhabitants. Native Americans, almost 4,000 years ago, tenaciously eked out an existence on the fish they could catch from these bountiful waters. Charles Racy carved out a new life by planting the sandy soil with pineapple strips. And as a young girl, Anne Leach Henry fought off mosquitoes and braved a hurricane. This land that has given so much to those who have lived on it has also demanded much from them. In the high-tech world of the mid-1990s, the land once again demanded tenacity from the citizens who loved it. And just as generations before had, these modern residents once again responded with dogged resolve.
I first got interested in the Indian Riverside Park property because I used to drive by this spot every day going to work, and I also used to know people that used to go to school here back when it was the Florida Institute of Technology, so I knew the property, I knew how beautiful it was and how special a place the site was. I got together with a group of people, some of which were involved with the original bond referendum that failed earlier on, and we decided to have a bond referendum to purchase the property.
Even with pressure from the citizen group, things did not go smoothly. In May, the county announced that they had not properly announced the referendum, and that procedural mistake led to a legal battle that put the results in jeopardy. Eventually, the court validated the results of the referendum, and the purchase could go forward. When negotiations with FIT began for the purchase, they bogged down almost immediately over asbestos that was found on the property. For months, discussions centered on the cost of the asbestos cleanup and who would pay. In early 1997, FIT agreed to pay the costs of the asbestos cleanup, and on February 16th, the County Commission voted to finally move forward with the purchase. The county closed on the property on April 26, 1997, and the process of deciding how future generations would use the land began. The work to develop a vision and a master plan for the property began in October 1997. Eventually, construction began, and on November 15th, 16th, 2001, the grand opening of the new Indian Riverside Park was held. Thousands of Martin County residents attended the event. It was a party that would have made Mrs. Leach proud, and it ushered in a brand new era for the beautiful riverside land that for centuries had played such an important role in the lives of those who had lived on it. Now, Indian Riverside Park will forever belong to the people of Martin County. Now, the land's beauty will be a part of the lives of every Martin County citizen.